So what is Enyo? Enyo is actually a JavaScript UI framework. And what that means is you develop JavaScript and use its structure, events, methods, and tools that it has for displaying or writing the UI, what you see in your app and how it interacts with everything on the device. It adapts to different screen sizes. We all know Opal is coming. Rumored device, 7-inch tablet. So Enyo is designed to run on these smaller devices. It will also eventually go into the phones. So you can have one framework that will scale up and down depending on what device you're using. It's easy to code in once you get the hang of it, and it's really easy to scan through CSS classes. It's all the touchpad apps on the device are actually built using Enyo, and you can actually get those off of the device if you want to and look at the source code for them to see how they work. So when do you use Enyo? When you have a native app that's installed on the device, this is Enyo. Enyo is native. It's not, it is a cross-platform tool, but on webOS, native apps are HTML, CSS apps. It's also cross-platform. It'll work in the launcher. So if you build an app and put it on the website instead of actually bundling it on device, now you can save it to your launcher and launch it through the web browser. Works great. Works as a cached web app in the same sense where it can just store it from the browser on the device and run it just fine. You can run it in the browser, touch-friendly, and it also works with the mouse quite nicely, as you'll see how you can use it in the browser. And it's for the mobile web apps, not just things that are bundled on the device. So it has a lot of different uses and where you can use Enyo. Enyo is on the appy side. You have appy and you have HTML. HTML developers are familiar with writing your HTML and your CSS separately and your JavaScript. Enyo is a little bit different. You don't write HTML, you write JavaScript. Okay. You also have your CSS. So you're not going to be writing HTML directly. So it is very much on the appy side. You don't declare your UI in HTML, you declare it in JavaScript. Okay. All your event handlers are done in JavaScript. You let Enyo control the screen. It handles sliding panes, what we call toasters, little pop-ups. It handles all of that for you. All you have to do is define your kinds and it'll handle the rest for you. And it's designed to be very fast in WebKit. If you load it up on a computer in Chrome, you'll see just how fast this thing can actually fly. So creating your app, you can code in any text editor, whether you're Mac, Linux, Windows. Honestly, and I'll show you a secret, I use Dreamweaver because I am a HTML website developer, so I use Dreamweaver. A lot of people, any Macs in the crowd? TextMate?
What's that?
TextMate?
No, I don't have it.
No? TextMate, you can use Notepad if you want to. I'm just saying you could. I didn't say you would want to.
It is a text editor.
Well, I mean, like if you use Internals by Jason Canuck, you can edit your app right on the device.
I've actually done that beta testing for people.
Just
edit a line of code.
You can edit it right on your device, save it, and re-go. There's no compiling or anything like that. You can test in the emulator, and now you can test in the browser, and of course you can test on the device. So you have 3 different ways of testing your app, which makes things a lot faster and easier.
I noticed that in Aries you do UI design in JavaScript as well.
Yeah, in Aries you use that drag and drop.
More Enyo-like than Mojo.
Yeah, Aries was written by the same team that wrote Enyo.
That makes sense.
So yeah, you will see a lot of things that are very identical in Aries, and that's why Aries does not support Enyo yet, because Matt McNulty is the guy who spearheaded Enyo. He, is doing Enyo, so they're not working on Aries. They'll be doubling back on that pretty soon. The directory structure is pretty comparable to Mojo. Okay, you have a set of files and folders, all of which are pretty much required. Your first file, your appinfo.json, handles things like your application ID, the application name, version, and other variables that you do need. You need a CSS folder. with your CSS file in it. In Mojo, you had a, what was the name of the file? The equivalent of the depends. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Sources.
Sources.
Sources.json. So sources.js is now depends.js, and it works a little bit differently, but if you've done any HTML web development, it's kind of like server-side includes. Okay, you're just including files into the thing. You have your images folder. You have your index.html file, which is the basis for the app, because we are running web apps after all. And then you have your source directory, which has all of the application UI and components and controls in it. All right. In your app info.json, you can see here the variables that you need. You need your ID. That has to be unique to every app. You can't have more than one app that has the same ID. You need your version so that you can increment it as you make changes and edits. You need a vendor, which is kind of like your name. You know, you can use your company name, your personal name, whatever you're going to use. Type, in this case, any PDK developers? Anyone doing C, C++? A little bit? Well, you'll do something a little bit different. In this case, for Enyo, you're going to use web. In your main, you need the index.html. So you could actually change that if you wanted to and say enyo.html. Your title, which is the actual name of your app. And then UI revision 2. That's new to anyone who hasn't done this yet. It tells the touchpad that you're using the larger screen size and that you're using Enyo. So it'll know to load it up on the touchpad. Mojo apps load in the little emulation window. UI revision 2 says go full screen with it. Here in your depends.js file, you have your enyo.depends. Here we're going to tell it to load in the 2 JavaScript files that we have that control the app, and then our CSS file. It's really simple. As your app grows and you have more files, you have to include many more files. Your index.html is super simple. Standard HTML. You have your title, which really doesn't matter because it doesn't get displayed anywhere. Your script includes the Enyo framework. Do keep an eye when you're testing in the browser and you're getting ready to compile for the device, the paths are going to be different. But then you have your second script tag, which just tells it to render into the page your the lister.main class. Yes?
Isn't the title what gets displayed on the little bar thing on the top left?
In the browser, it's displayed in the browser tab.
Like on the touchpad where it says, like in Spaz, it says Spaz HD Beta Preview, which is different from the icon. Is that the title?
No, webOS does not pull that from the index file. webOS pulls that from the Enyo appinfo.json. You can see here the title right here, Mr. Lister. And that's actually where it pulls that from.
Some apps, though, they do have a different name on like the app icon and in the app when the little menu in the top. Some of them actually have a different name for those two. How would they?
I believe what's going on there, I don't think that should happen. What app is doing that?
I think Spaz actually does it, or no, it says that. I know it.
It may be truncated in the drop down, but that would be it. But this actually controls the name of the app, not what's in the index.html file.
Because I have seen apps like that.
It should not happen. If it does, I can ask someone about what's going on there. But the second script tag, is pretty easy. It's just saying render. And the lister.main is a name that you assign that you'll see in just a little bit when we get to our main.js file. That's your basic setup. Those are the base components that you need, for an Enyo app. Moving into the actual app, you can see here we have our source /main.js file. Everything in Enyo is done with what's called kinds, and each kind is kind of like its own little component. It's very object-oriented and self-contained from everything. You can write little pieces of code and reuse them over and over and over. I'm really enjoying that. Here you have your enyo.kind, creator. You have a name, so you have to name it. In this case, we've named it lister.main. You can see here again in the index.html, our lister.main, rendered into the body. The kind is a vertical flexbox. Has anyone worked with vertical and horizontal flex boxes? It's a. Who's ever tried to position things vertically in a web page? You know what I'm talking about. It's a pain in the butt. The new HTML5 flex boxes work really well. You can resize things. The things that we used to use tables for when we all went into CSS, we still use tables for, we can do with flex boxes. Your components is what you can essentially say is your HTML. That's how I had to think of it in terms. So you've got your first element, which is a page header. Okay, that's the thing that goes at the very top of the page. And you give it content. So you're telling it that it's a page header. So think of it as like H1. So kind page header is like open H1. Then you got your content, then it automatically closes your H1 tag. Okay. Then you have your labeled container with the label of center content. That has a flex of 1. What that's telling it to do is expand to take up as much room as possible given the other elements. And then you have your toolbar. So your page header is going to be first. Your second piece is going to expand vertically as far as it can, and then have your toolbar on the bottom. And on the toolbar, we have the 2 different things with buttons in it. And you will see how this looks here. You can see the page type. You can see your toolbar at the bottom there with your foo bar in it. You can see how the center content expanded vertically to take up as much space as possible. And then you have your Mr. Lister page title at the top. When you're ready to start testing this and using it on devices or whatever, who's actually worked with apps on device? You use the command line tools. Palm-package, and then your app name. Or the path to your app if you're not already in that directory. Then you have palm-install, the 2 command lines, and that's what these are here. So in the emulator, this is what you will see. So you can just fire up the emulator, palm package it, and then palm install. If you use VirtualBox, you can click it, or you can create a batch script to automatically package and install it for you. It makes life so much easier. Device testing. If you're actually going to test on it. Hey, we have devices now. Sorry, I need to update this because this was designed a little bit different before these devices came out. But it's pretty much the same thing. If you have the emulator closed and your device plugged in, just palm install, and it installs fine. If you want to tell it, you have to tell it to a device through USB, and then the actual name of your package. Adding event listeners in Enyo. You can see that we have the same lister.main, scene that we had before. On the toolbar though, on the foo button, we've added the on-click do foo.
Unclick do foo.
On-click do foo.
That's like webOS kung fu right there.
That is webOS kung fu right there. If you worked with HTML before, everything has an on-click event. It's the same thing. It's the on-click event. In this case, you're not clicking on anything, you're tapping on it on the device, but it's the same thing. Then you can see below we have our do foo function. Now, those functions have an end sender and an end event. I just named it different when you see it. So you can see all it's doing is saying print to the console log, doing foo, so that you know that it's actually being clicked.
Okay.
And yes?
It's now enyo.info. Console.log is now enyo.info.
Yeah, I'm still using console.log. I don't think I'm going to get away from that. It actually does need to be changed. You have different Enyo functions that you can use. So you can use enyo.info. Is it? Yeah. Enyo.warn and info.error.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're debugging things, for errors, you can print out enyo.error. That way you know it's an actual error. Warn for things that aren't critical but might need attention, and then info when you just need some variables printed out.
If you print out a variable with console log, are you able to actually browse the object, like open it up?
No, it won't print the objects. It's only printing text.
Enyo.info, I can actually get the object and the console log, open it up, and walk through the tree and see everything.
You just convinced me to move to Enyo.info. I have not. I realized after switching from Mojo to Enyo, I want to try and stay a little bit neutral in terms of using some of those functions. So I've just been using console.log. But all right, do Enyo instead of console.log, and I can show you that later how that would. You can see that debugging information. Use Enyo.info, and then you can actually see the object. It sends all the parameters, or
well, you give of course what you want to look at, but if you passed event, if you just say Enyo event, you can actually open event and look at all the parameters all the way down as far as you want to go.
In Chrome and Safari. Beautiful. I will be using Enyo.info, so take that advice. Use Enyo.info instead of console.log. But it's a very simple example of the on-click event. So when you click on the button foo, which will go here. Oh, here it is. You can see it down there, foo. So when you click on it, all it's going to do is print out a message that says doing that. So there are a lot of events that you can listen for in Enyo. You have your standard ones like the on-click. You have on change. No, that's actually the properties. I'm sorry. All right, you have your extra WebKit events like the accelerometer and rotation. You also have, oh no, GPS is an event. That's a service call. What am I thinking? So yeah, Palm has added special events. Yes.
They added the ability to access the microphone.
Yes, they've added a microphone API.
Okay, because I know there was for a time period there was not a microphone API, and I haven't looked at the SDK in a long time. So
microphone's not accessible in 3.0 right now.
Okay.
Right now.
What about Bluetooth? Communication to a Bluetooth microphone?
No.
No.
I think you can. I'm not sure which profiles they opened up. I'm not too much on Bluetooth, so I'd have to look that up.
The reason I ask is I'm looking at maybe starting for a Ventrilo application. So
it's. I'm not sure what the holdup is on 3.0 and the touchpad for the mic API. But I know it's a high priority to get that back up and running.
Let's hope, because look how long we waited and,
Yeah, that's why we still don't have Shazam, and it's the big one that we're missing due to the lack. I've been waiting on a microphone API, but 2.0 only, it's really hard to go ahead and write a whole bunch of stuff that supports it.
Well, I didn't even realize that 2.0 supported it.
Yeah, because there's a couple apps out right now. Voices, voice memos.
Your voice recorders.
I'm a Sprint user.
Oh.
Yeah.
No excuse, man. No excuse.
What, are you Franken-free over there?
Of course, I got tools if you want to do it, brother.
You just need a free two. I have a spare one that you can purchase. I'm just saying, I meant to bring my Sprint free, by the way, which I'm no longer using in case anyone needs a modem donation.
Well, yeah.
But
all I need is an active COM board and a donor there, pal.
But so that Palm modified WebKit to add in all these extra events for things that it didn't already support, like accelerometer and the rotation. So when you rotate the device, you get an event that fires. Then you have your Enyo events, which are really cool. On mouse hold. So when you tap and hold on something, you used to see it in some apps have that kind of thing. Those are special Enyo ones. You have your dragging and your drop ones. You have window activated. That one's a little bit hard to describe for anyone that's trying to do a multi-stage app. It has its own caveats and things on that. And then you have your things like property change events. So when you have text fields or select boxes where people are entering data, you can be notified whenever some of that data changes. So if they select a different value, you can change the page depending on what value they entered. So you have all your events that you can listen for, and you can pretty much do whatever you need to with it. Citing views. Citing views are a cool new Enyo thing, where you have kind of like two little views, windows.
Panes.
Let's call them windows. You have
Panes?
Well, you have a pane. Panes actually work different. This is a sliding view, so it's kind of like two panes side by side, and you can move and do different things with those different views. Having problems?
Yeah, the fourth time it's fallen off, these darn HP shirts.
I lost mine, so it's pretty simple. you'll see it in the next example, but this is how you set up the components and the kind for the sliding pane. And here you can see now we've replaced our middle content with the sliding pane. So the right side is for your bigger content, your left side is for things like lists and things that you might want to control. And we've gone ahead and stuck two little buttons named foo in there for each of those. I have no idea what he was trying to say on this slide. All he's done is he's set up things a little bit for lister.main. Still have your he changed it. Now for your setup you have a button, add category. Your create function is if you want to override when this particular view is created and rendered, you can add any programming logic that you want. Just make sure you always remember to include this inherited arguments. Custom data, he's got a little array there with foo bar and foo baz, and then I handle add. So he hasn't added an event listed on that category. Like I said, I stole this from someone else, so I got to get caught up on it. Now he's changed even more. All right, published is a type. Everything in Enyo is encapsulated, so everything's private. Parents can see the information of their children, and those children's children, and so on. So two, side-by-side components can't see each other or the data. Published lets you actually publish data that's public, that others can access. So everything's private, published is public. Foo changed, you have another event listener. So foo has been changed with this foo. It's just printing out what is being changed to. And another code. So he's setting foo of new value. That last line, ignore that. Because that's invalid.
I'll completely say the opposite. That's the only way it'll work. If you try to set food directly, you won't get the food changed event.
Yeah, but it's outside of the
in another code. It says in somewhere else in the code, the main for.
Yeah, but in this scene, that shouldn't be there. Oh. That has to be in somewhere, but it should be this $$ dot object dot event. Here we go. This looks a lot better. Structure, you still have, now he's got, who's done JavaScript programming before? So you're familiar with objects and arrays? Anyone not familiar with what those are?
It's painful.
Okay, so y'all understand what this means. Categories is the beginning of an array. To-do items is the beginning of an array. Data index is an object. Current category is a value of today. Components is an array. He's truncated the functions where he's got get category by index, get category items, get category count, and then a regenerate index function. All of them just do what it needs to, and the get ones it just returns the values that he needs. I don't know how else to explain that. Where did he create this at? More code that I'll let you look at. Actually, what I need to do is I need to generate this whole sample so that you can see what it is. In his so when you're creating the object, what he's doing is he's going ahead and he's assigning some data. So he's got var today with an ID of today, a name of today. Then he's pushing that to his categories. He's adding some to-do items, which is item 1 and item 2. Both are open. Both are tagged for today. And then he's regenerating his index. So it'll actually become apparent in a second. Here he changed the name to data. Now he has this $.data.sum method. Enyo has methods. Whenever you create something in your components, it automatically creates all these special methods for you that you'll have to learn. When you want to change the content in something, you'll do this $.object.setContent, and that will change the content. You have another method for getContent, which will return the value of what it is. That's one of the things you have to use. You have to use all the methods. You don't have you can't just change the value on something and then expect it to update the UI. You have to use these special methods. Has other things, set class, or add class, remove class, set class. For changing your CSS styles, you can .hide, .show for hiding and showing it, which just sets the display property to none or visible.
Right.
There we go. Enyo lists. Lists work a lot differently in Enyo, and I actually enjoy them once you get around how it is. You start it by giving it its name, and you define its kind as a virtual list. In this case, he's going ahead and setting a width on it, which you can do directly. A flex of 1, so it'll take up the whole vertical space within the left sidebar. Okay. On setup row, that is a special function that lists use. So he is defining it. All he's doing is telling it use setup category row. All right, so on setup row, he's telling it to then call setup category row, which is a little different. Components, lists then have item kinds. So he's defining it there. He has his item kind. You can give it a class, a CSS class. Your layout kind is, inside of it, it'll lay it out as a horizontal flex box, so it'll take up all the horizontal space that's possible. Your on-click event, which he's telling it to use category clicked when you click on it. Tap highlight true, so that when you tap on it, it gives the highlight class color to it. Then he's giving it the components, which are category name. And the components for that kind, that item kind, will actually be each row when it's rendered. And you'll see how it works. Here he has his setup category row, which is called every time a row is generated. And it takes its insender and index. You don't have to worry about those. You don't send those along. It automatically does that for you. So it's just doing some things. It's checking if the index is less than 0. Because if it's -1, then you don't have a value that you can return. So he's returning false, which will stop the list setup. If the index is greater than the number of items you have in your list, then it's telling it to go ahead and, if it's less than the number of items, it's going ahead. All right, var cat equals this $.data.get category by index .in index. It's the special function that he set up to get the value of the category by its index number. So that's all that is. Then he's telling it to go ahead and set the category name, the content, to the cat.name from the variable where you got it before. And you can see here, you have the category name. What it's doing is for each render, it's inserting it's setting the content to the name of that particular item. Then he's got some code to determine if it should be selected or not. So that's where he's holding is selected. He's using the index, passing the index, seeing if it's selected. I know it's a little messy, and I'm sorry, I should have gone over this more. So if it's supposed to be selected, all he's doing is using the apply style method to set the background color to yellow. Otherwise, he's changing the background to nothing. List features have certain things. So when you change something on a list, you have to then refresh or render the list. And both work pretty much the same. So that's what the first one is just saying this $.list name. That's how you access the list. .refresh the list. That'll refresh everything in it and rewrite it to the screen. On acquire page is when you're using paging. You can actually set it up to look ahead for different pages to call a web service. He doesn't actually go over that in the code, so it's there. And you have two different kinds. Item and swipeable item. So when you want to delete something, you don't set it as an item kind. You set it as a swipeable item. And I'll show you that. And then you have your DB list. So you can integrate directly with DB8, and it will pull the data. You just pass it to the list function, and it'll set up everything for you. So now with all those changes, this is what the app looks like. You have your today with the items that it has and the different categories on the left. Services. Services in webOS are really cool. They let you do the things that normally you have to, use C++ for or compile code, and you can do it in JavaScript. So they've set up special services for GPS, DB8, and your address, contact data. Then they have their prefab Enyo services, which are actually built right into WebKit, like SQLite and Ajax. In Enyo, Ajax is called web service. So if you're doing that, you'll have to get that idea in your head. I've never used the mock service before. Have you used mock service?
Have not.
I believe that's just what it'll actually connect to the emulator or device.
Yeah, I've actually seen the example on a printer. So basically, when you on the printer API demonstrations, they show mock services.
Okay, I'll have to check that
That
out.
simulates it, where you're printing, how many printers you have, things like that.
I'll have to look into that. Then you have your web services, which is kind of like Ajax, basically. I actually don't care for the web service in Enyo because you can't control the different events. Like if the page can't be found, you can't customize that. If there's an error in processing it, all you have is success and fail. That's it. If you use the XHR, you can actually customize what you want to do. And then you have your database services. Who use databases in their apps?
I will be, and
You
I'm
will
currently
be?
working on like the back end. I'm using a Symphony database on my web side,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to be bringing the touchpad app that I'm going to be working on. I'm currently working on the Mojo version. Is pulling all of that database stuff into the app. So
Okay, DB service is actually for DB8, which probably isn't going to be what you want. You're going to want to use you'll use SQLite on yours then probably. How much data do you think it's going to be?
a lot.
A lot, yeah. You'll have to use SQLite, and you do know you need to define it with the ext to store it on the media partition. Okay. webOS system services work very easy. I'm going to teach you how this works, but don't use this.
Don't use this.
I asked this question because this is actually a private phone call, but it's in this tutorial anyways. What he's done here is he's defined in his components, okay, the setup of the thing, the name get preferences. The kind is system service, which is what we're talking about. Then you have your method, which is kind of like telling it what to do when you call it, which is get preferences. Your on success and your on failure function. So what to do when it succeeds and what to do when it fails. Then he has, when you click on the preferences button, which you'll see in a little bit, all it's doing is setting this dot message is requesting preferences of white. Then he's doing a call to get the keys for the locale, default web search, and browse enabled JavaScript. Then it will return to got preferences. Yeah, all right, so you can see here, get preferences, he's calling the system service with these keys. He wants locale, default web search, browser enabled JavaScript. When it succeeds, it calls got preferences. So he's just setting his little message that he got preferences, setting it to the locale, in response, .locale, which is the value you want, and then the language code and the other values. If you're not sure what it's returning, you can do enyo.log, which will print out the object right there so you can see all the values that are in it. Palm doesn't always document what values they return in different things, and you'll be surprised that things don't always return what you expect. Now if you do a GPS call, you get an immediate on success call with just return value true, which is telling you, hey, I got your call, but it doesn't have any GPS data. If you expect it to have data, then it will actually error out on you when you try and use it. Web services, pretty much it's your standard Ajax call. Okay, you have your name, which you define so that you can reference it later. The kind is called web service. Then you have your URL. In this case, he's got a global variable named main URL, and he's appending .search to it. Your on success and your on failure calls. So when you call your web service, it's going to call your on success or your on failure depending on what happens. Then to invoke the call, you can see here the remote.search.call. Okay, that calls the web service with the URL on it, and when it gets the results, it does remote search or got remote failure. In this case, the web services call have 3 parameters, which is your response and your in request. You'll have to get used to that. The number of parameters will change depending on what type of call you're doing. Controls in Enyo. Very good examples of these is the Style Matters app. When you install the SDK, you can go into, and I forget the exact location, but on your device, it stores all the sample code. And the Style Matters and the theming examples are very good. You can see here, pretty much they have all the different widgets and things that you might want to do. You've got your buttons, active and inactive, for spinning buttons, your input and rich text boxes. You have different kinds. Your rounded ones are going to be when you're wanting to use them in the toolbars. Your square ones, wherever you want them to be, you can use them wherever. But standard inputs have no styling around them. Slider and progress bars. And you can get the code for every widget off of these examples. They bundle it right on there for you to see it. More examples of putting things into labeled and unlabeled groups, your different pickers. If you've used the device, you're very familiar with what these look like, but it just gives you all the code. The buttons work a little bit differently. In Mojo, when you want to do it, you have to change an actual image to change the color of a button. You had your standard primary, secondary, affirmative, negative, but now you can actually use blue. And all you have to do is define one little CSS class, my blue button. And all you have to do is say background color equals blue. And then apply that to your button, and it changes it instantly. So much easier to apply styles to buttons. All of your different radio buttons and tabs. I don't get the difference between tabs and radio buttons, because they're really the same thing. But they do have a distinction. Your standard headers, same thing again for your headers and toolbars. You can change the colors very easily just by defining that custom CSS class and giving it a background color, and then applying that to your button. Everything in Enyo is actually a DOM element, because when it creates and renders into the document body, it runs it all through the DOM so you can access it. Again, here's your custom class. So you just give it a custom class and color. And then when you create a button, you just say class name equals this. And then, or you can do the this.item.add class, which will add the class to the button. Again, this is actually what it looks like. In your CSS file, you have the class name.today, the background color of yellow. And when it's generating the actual row, all it's doing is adding the class of today. And suddenly, it looks like that. So your actual rows. Same thing applies to buttons, backgrounds, pretty much any object out there. You can just change it. Next steps, anyone not in the early access program? You're all in the early access program, good. Then you all have VirtualBox, and you pretty much all have Chrome. Anyone not have the 3.0 SDK? You don't? We'll have to get, I actually brought all of the SDKs so you can install it. And then go through all of the sample code once you get the SDK installed. It's really quite simple.